Ooh, it's a special PromG Halloween video. Ooh. Ugh. I could not see shit with that sheet on my head. You know, I really wanted to wear a costume for this video, but my procrastinating ass forgot to order one for Halloween, so, you know, the bed sheet will have to do for today. But hey, what's going on, guys? My name is PromG. Welcome back to a brand new video. Now, today, I'm giving you guys a little bit of a Halloween special of sorts. If you guys don't know, I'm a big fan of movies, in particular anything and everything horror, and the last couple of years I've set out to do a challenge called Spooktober, where I go and watch a different horror movie every single day of October. And since so many of you guys are always asking me to do movie videos, I decided, what the heck, I'll do one for this year's Spooktober festivities, ranking every single horror movie I watched in October 2023. So for this video, I'm going to be going over all 20 horror movies I watched this October, not the full 30, just because I need to give myself time to make the video. Without wasting any more time, I say without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this year's Spooktober 2023 horror movie ranking. Alright, so we're starting off the list at the very bottom, the worst horror movie that I watched this month. And I will say, choosing the absolute worst was extremely hard between the bottom two, but after much deliberation, I decided that the worst horror movie I watched this month is Doom Asylum. Doom Asylum is basically this very low-budget slasher where this guy gets into a car wreck, they try to do the autopsy on him at this trauma center, and then he ends up not being dead and he kills a bunch of teenagers with these medical tools like scalpels and drills and things like that. Now, it is no secret that Doom Asylum is a terrible movie. In fact, it was very clear that this movie was made with the intention of being bad. The editing is terrible, the acting, the dialogue is just absolutely corny. But therein lies the problem I have with this movie. In my opinion, when something is so bad that it's good, it's usually because it was actually trying to be good. I feel like for this kind of movie to work, the director and cast can't really be in on the joke. I mean, take a look at movies like The Room, Neil Breen's Twisted Pair. I mean, these are movies that you just think they take way too seriously and it ends up being funny, whereas this movie is purposely absolute dog shit and just expects you to laugh along with it, which doesn't really work for me. I will say there are some pretty cool kills, and the location that they film at is like a real asylum, which is pretty cool, but other than that, I wouldn't say there's much anything of value in this movie, so if this movie looks or sounds interesting to you, I would tell you to steer clear. So coming in at the number 19 spot is the movie that I said I had a very hard time going back and forth deciding which was worse compared to Doom Asylum, and by a marginal difference, I'm giving the 19th spot, the second worst movie on this list, to 2011's Megan is Missing. Now, if any of you have ever seen this movie, you're probably screaming through your device, why is this not the very bottom movie? This movie is terrible, and I agree, this movie is terrible. It should not exist. Basically, it's like a found footage kind of movie about these young middle school girls who get kidnapped, tortured, and worse. And the only reason I have this movie a little bit above Doom Asylum is that it does achieve what it sets out to do. This movie is meant to shock you, to disturb you, to be extremely depraved, and it is. So the movie definitely succeeds in portraying a lot of the depressing emotions that it tries to, whereas Doom Asylum is trying to be funny, but it just doesn't work. Now, the difference is that Doom Asylum actually has some creativity and artistry and passion you can kind of feel, whereas Megan is Missing is solely shocking because of the subject matter and what this movie is about. I mean, literally anybody could make this movie, and we were talking about the terrible things happening to young girls. I mean, obviously, it's going to be extremely depressing, and this movie, it's just disgusting. This is one I would say you should all out avoid unless you are morbidly curious. Stay far away from this movie. It sucks major ass. Alright, so moving on to the number 18 spot, we're finally getting into the movies that I think there are good things about, but I just didn't quite enjoy as much as I thought I would. Coming in at number 18 is 1981's The Prowler. This movie is basically about this psycho guy who dresses up in like full World War I or II military gear, and he just goes crazy killing these teenagers at a high school dance. To make this segment short, this movie I don't think is a good movie. The acting is bad, the story is boring, there are like these hilariously long segments of just dead air where these characters are like investigating to see if there's anything amiss, and they literally last for like 5 to 10 minutes. But the good parts of this movie come with the villain, the Prowler. He is just so badass, and they really do show quite a bit of him in this movie, just going ham. And that leads into the second really good thing about this movie, that is the kills and gore. Now, this movie is so gory, it genuinely made me uncomfortable. Like, the makeup effects and the gore effects went absolutely insane. Some of the best, probably the best I saw all this year. And it's just really a shame that the rest of the elements of this movie drag it down for me. So I would say that this movie is still worth your time. I think it's less than an hour and a half, and for the kills alone, I would say it's worth it. But all in all, as a horror movie, not quite the best. Moving on to number 17 is Jeepers Creepers from 2001. Now, this movie is one that I had never seen before, but it's always kind of held a nostalgic place in my mind. I just remember as a kid, my sister said this was like the scariest horror movie ever. This movie actually came out the year I was born, and I haven't seen it until now, but I finally decided I'm gonna watch this cult classic, and the beginning of this movie is so awesome. Basically have this brother and sister who are driving through the kind of countryside, and they see this weird guy in a hat throwing bodies into this tube. And then when this creeper guy sees them, he gets in this giant armored car and chases them down. And it is so intense. It is so cool. If the entire movie was like this first half an hour, this would be probably one of my favorite horror movies ever. But unfortunately, it doesn't. I don't know, I just feel like as this movie goes on, we get some more supernatural aspects. I won't spoil anything. It just got less and less interesting. The story kind of just keeps mulling as it goes on. So the first 30 minutes, spectacular. Love the vibes, love these 2000s grungy horror movies. This one, as a whole, just didn't do it for me though. Coming in at the number 16 spot, we have an absolute classic. That is Frankenstein from 1931. This is one of the genre-defining, most influential horror movies ever, of course based on the classic novel. And I definitely enjoyed my time with Frankenstein. You know, the classic tale, the iconic scenes, you know, shouting "It's alive," the giant tower with the lightning, and of course Frankenstein's monster coming alive. But all in all, I think this is just one of those movies that I really appreciate more than I enjoyed watching or would ever feel like I needed to watch it again. Don't get me wrong, again, there are some great aspects. The performance from whoever does Frankenstein's monster is spectacular, but other than that, I didn't really find a whole lot drawing me into the story. Moving on to the number 15 spot for now, we have Pet Semetary from 1989. Similar to Jeepers Creepers, this is just one of those kind of horror cult classics that a lot of people say means a lot to them, and I went into this movie not really knowing anything other than the Ramones song, which gave me a whole lot of whiplash when it ended up playing after the super depressing end of this movie. But yeah, I don't really want to get too much into the plot because it's hard to do so without getting into spoilers, but basically, this family moves into a home where they go out and they go on this trail and they find this pet cemetery that this old man says can bring pets and people back to life. The one thing I will give Pet Semetary is that it is genuinely creepy and depressing at times. The ending, when this, I can't say that because there's spoilers, but just take my word, it is creepy as hell. And again, I can't really get into the depressing moments either because of spoilers, but just know this movie is actually really sad and really depressing, but it was still pretty enjoyable. Not my favorite from this year, obviously, but there's still some good things about it, and I can definitely see why this one is a cult classic. So changing gear a little bit, coming in at the number 14 spot is a comedy musical horror, and one that is beloved by so many horror fans. That is the Rocky Horror Picture Show 1975. This was an interesting one. The movie is basically about this couple whose car breaks down in the rain. They go to this mansion where all these like eccentric rich people are having this weird party. And then in comes Tim Curry in drag as the transsexual of Transylvania. They break out into songs. Meatloaf, the singer, makes an appearance. I mean, plain and simple, this movie is just weird. It doesn't have like a flowing story, or at least not a, structural, traditional one. But, some of the songs I liked pretty well. Other ones I felt were kind of annoying, and just when you don't have a strong forward-moving plot, I can sometimes get bored. That's my own fault. I know a lot of people love this movie, and obviously there are some trans and gay themes and messages in this movie. I mean, that are right at the forefront, and I understand a lot of people identify with this movie. Me personally, I don't identify with it in that way, but there's still a lot of enjoyment to be had in this one. By far one of the most unique horror movies I watched this season. And moving on to the number 13 spot, we have a horror movie that is very popular as far as horror comedy movies go. That is 2009 Zombieland. Of course, this movie is basically about the last people on Earth as they gather together, trying to survive against these zombie hordes that have taken over the United States, scrounging for vehicles, weapons, Twinkies, Bill Murray. Yeah, Bill Murray. I mean, this movie is nothing incredible. It doesn't do anything extraordinary storytelling or romance-wise, although Emma Stone as a bad girl is pretty good in this movie. But despite being about a zombie apocalypse, it's pretty funny, lighthearted, has some really good moments, and all around, I just can't be mad at this movie. All in all, I think it's a solid zombie movie, and one you probably can't go wrong with. At the number 12 spot, we're going back to classics, and we're going back to Frankenstein. At number 12, we have The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. Now, I think this movie is a substantial improvement upon the first one. I think that though there are emotional moments that are really good in that first one, the emotional moments and the tugging at the heartstrings is so much better in this one. Basically, when Frankenstein is supposed dead at the end of the first movie, turns out he wasn't actually dead, and he survived, and he goes on a terror rampage again. The other plotline, you have Frankenstein, the scientist who created the monster, team up with his old professor to create a mate, a female for Frankenstein to mate with. Yeah, she doesn't show up till the last 5 minutes. But honestly, I don't even care because again, Frankenstein's monster, whoever acted as him, does a great physical performance and just performance all around. The characters like the old housekeeper lady, she's pretty good in this one too. A lot of people have also said that there's some LGBTQ plus subtext in this movie, and while I can see where they're coming from, I personally don't agree unless the director explicitly said so. But yeah, this is still a really good movie. I think a lot better than the original Frankenstein, and honestly, probably one of the best classic horror movies that I've ever personally watched. So now we're rounding off the bottom half of this list with the number 11 spot that goes to Halloween H2O from 1999, a full 20 years after the original John Carpenter masterpiece. Now this is actually a rewatch for me, but upon first watch, this was already one of my favorite Halloween movies in the entire franchise. I will say, Michael Myers sucks complete dick in this movie. I mean, everything from the mask that looks like it was made in a preschool arts and crafts class to just the physical performance that Michael Myers has, it turns on a dime from super sinister to like Looney Tunes goofy. Not to even mention the end of this movie, which is pretty controversial on its own, but I won't get into that for obvious reasons. But the really good part about this movie is Jamie Lee Curtis, the lead girl in the original Halloween. She's back all these years later as a mom. I think she absolutely kills this role. You see her as this concerned mother who wants to protect her son, knowing that Michael Myers could still be out there. We also see her son's perspective where she's just being paranoid and can't let go of the demons of her past. And just seeing Jamie Lee Curtis's character, overcome these demons in more ways than one is really, really cool. And for a character-driven horror movie, I would say this one is pretty great. Moving on to the number 10 spot on this horror movie ranking, and the number 10 spot goes to The Week of the Killer, also oftenly mistranslated as Cannibal Man. Yeah, this movie isn't actually about cannibals or a cannibal man, though I can definitely see where the idea comes from with the mistranslation, but this movie is basically about a guy who ends up killing a taxi driver because he doesn't want to pay a $4 taxi fare. Yeah. And then when his girlfriend, who is there with him in the taxi, thinks that she's going to go tell the police and turn themselves in, he kills her too. And this leads to an extended string of murders where people come looking for the last person that got killed, and once they find out, they gotta go too. This is probably one of the least scary movies on this horror movie list, but it's still a pretty solid slasher, and one with some great themes, and honestly some pretty interesting gay subtext, which adds a whole other layer to this movie to enjoy. I think there is a lot to unpack here. There's a whole lot of quality and soul within this movie, just the way that the camera moves is super unique. I mean, the cinematography is top-notch for a low-budget horror movie like this, as well as the gore and the makeup, I think, is really cool as well. The kills aren't all that great. They range from really awesome to extremely lame, but you know, they can't all be winners, and all in all, I think that this movie just has a whole lot of heart, and if you're looking for a really good foreign horror movie from the 70s, I think that you cannot go wrong with The Week of the Killer. Coming in at the number 9 spot, we're going back to the classics, back to the 1930s for The Invisible Man. Now, I was super impressed with the effects in this movie. Obviously, being from the early 30s, I really didn't know how they were going to approach, making a man invisible other than just having nobody there. But not only do they portray this image of an invisible man, going through, knocking stuff over, riding a bicycle, I mean, it looks really convincing, but also the special effects in this were super surprising and interesting for the time period. And I think that is the best thing about this movie, is just the effects and what they do to convince the audience that there really is an invisible man wreaking all this havoc and going crazy on this town. It looks really good, and the story is pretty good as well. There were definitely some slower moments, but there are also some pretty high moments as well in this story, and all in all, it definitely kept me entertained, it kept me engaged, and just considering the time period this movie was made, it just adds a whole other wow factor to this movie. I think it still stands up extremely well today, almost 100 years later, which is extremely impressive. Now, coming in at the number 8 spot, we have a Japanese horror movie, and with the Spooktober challenge, I usually try to throw in a healthy dose, a healthy mix of horror movies, some early classics, some 70s, 80s classics, some modern stuff, and some foreign stuff. And for one of my foreign horror movies this year, I chose Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder in Hell. Now, this is a very low budget, obviously, Japanese horror movie, I believe from the 90s. The first part of the movie is spent going to this old abandoned house where apparently this evil spirit lives. It's more occult focused and honestly has some really creepy moments and imagery. But then the second half of this movie is a complete tonal shift. It becomes blood-soaked, wacky, that typical Japanese wackiness that you expect from movies like this. It is just absolutely batshit insane. And this movie is not 100% original. It takes a lot, and I mean a lot, from Evil Dead 2, which is personally one of my favorite horror movies ever, so there are some really cool nods, some references, and inspiration taken from that classic horror movie. So this movie is by no means a ripoff of another successful horror movie. It has a whole lot of soul and identity all its own, but it definitely pays homage to one of the greatest horror movies ever, and I really love that. And of course, being a very gory movie, there are some really cool kills. One where somebody stabs a knife through the back of the head, the eye pops out, then he brings it back and the eye pops back in. I mean, it was so cool. Again, not all of the kills and effects are good, some are really bad, but again, it's a low budget movie, it's what you expect, and personally, I had a whole lot of fun with this movie. Now, coming in at the number 7 spot, we have another rewatch of my favorite Friday the 13th movie in the entire franchise. At the number 7 spot, we have Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Now, when picking my favorite Friday the 13th movie, it basically goes between Part 6, the final chapter, and Jason X. I think is a whole lot of fun as well. But I think that Friday the 13th, Part 6 is where all the stars align, and we have Friday the 13th at its most well-rounded. Now, this is the movie out of the franchise so far that takes itself the least seriously. I mean, there are lots of jokes. In the beginning, Jason does this golden eye intro where he throws a knife like James Bond. And I just think that the humor is really good and really fun in this movie. Jason is also super badass. And honestly, I really don't have anything bad to say about this movie other than, there are some slower moments near the end. But, when you get to that climax on the boat with the lake on fire, I mean, you just gotta thank God that movies like this exist. At number 6, we have the 1988 film Edge of the Axe. Now, I'll let you take a look at this poster, and you're probably already thinking this is just a cheap knockoff of Friday the 13th and Halloween, and that is exactly what I thought going in. I do not blame you at all, but this movie has so many quirks and special charm that I think really make it one of the best movies from the end of the golden age of slashers. Now, the plot of this movie is pretty simple. You have this Jason-esque character who has this mask and this axe who goes around killing people in this town, and they're trying to figure out who's doing it. But you also have this aspect with this girl and this guy who like talk via email. Like it's so cheesy, like vintage computer internet age stuff. I just love it so much. And believe me when I say this, I do not publicly simp very often, but the lead girl in this movie, I wrote down her name, Christina Marie Lane. I don't think she's in much else, but in this movie, she is like so cute, I just can't even stand it. Now, I will be the first to admit that maybe, just maybe, the 8 out of 10 I gave this movie is a teensy bit inflated just because the main character is extremely cute, but besides just that, this is a really fun movie that surprisingly does take some stuff from Halloween and Friday the 13th, but forms its own unique identity, and is overall a super memorable slasher that really does a good job standing out from the pack. Alright, we have finally arrived at the top 5, and the 5 spot is going to a movie that actually came out this year. In fact, I believe this October, and that is, of course, Saw X. I believe the 10th installment in the long-running Saw franchise, and I'll have to say, this is probably my favorite movie so far. Granted, I've only seen the first 3, but just from what I've seen, they don't get much better than that. But Saw X basically follows John Kramer in between the first and second movie when he's seeking cancer treatment in some foreign country, I believe in Central America, and he ends up getting scammed. Like, the whole thing is a scam. So he goes out, he kidnaps all the people who are involved in, tricking him into thinking he was getting brain surgery, and of course, he puts him through a few games. Obviously, what you go to a Saw movie for is the traps, and I think the traps in this one are really, really good. A lot of gore, especially, man, that first one. Besides one trap I thought was kind of a lot easier than the other. I mean, there are really, really hard ones that, you can't fool your way out of, at least not as far as I know. The movie moves at a very brisk pace and also has this aspect that kind of tries to humanize John Kramer, make him out to be like a victim, which I know some people have a problem with. Personally, I thought it was kind of an interesting spin on the whole Saw movie formula to do so. But yeah, I really don't have anything bad to say about this movie, other than that my experience in the theater was kind of hindered by this fat bastard getting a very loud, groaning handjob from his fat-ass girlfriend in the row right in front of me. But that's neither here nor there. This movie was really good. Alright guys, I am back, as you can see, in different clothes on a different day. So many technical difficulties recording this video. I've had to do it like 3 times, but I'm here to pick up where I left off with the number 4 spot on this list. Coming in at the number 4 spot, we have a classic horror movie that inspired one of the all-time greatest horror movies ever created, John Carpenter's The Thing. And of course, I'm talking about 1951's The Thing from Another World. Now, it would be totally unfair for me just to compare the 2 movies together, obviously, because one came decades after the other. So no, while the practical effects, the makeup, and the legendary Kurt Russell performance are not anywhere to be found in the 1951 movie, The Thing from Another World has so much charm and unique things about it that it's still definitely worth watching even after all these years and remakes of this story. So we all know that in John Carpenter's The Thing, the main story aspect is, of course, The Thing can become kind of like an imposter. He can impersonate any one of the crew members, and he kind of got this Among Us situation trying to decide who is the thing, who can we trust, and who will put us in danger. Well, that whole aspect driving that movie is nowhere to be found in the 1951 version, whereas the main conflict in this movie, other than the Thing coming to kill these people in this Arctic base, is weighing the value of, the scientific value of the Thing and the technology it has, and keeping these people alive. This movie also nails the isolated Arctic environment that the John Carpenter remake does very well as well. So yeah, this movie just has a lot of great things going for it, and for its time, I mean, it's still very impressive. And if you like The Thing, or you haven't seen the John Carpenter remake, I would definitely recommend checking out this awesome horror classic. Alright, so coming in at the number 3 spot, we have a movie from the one, the only Sir Robert Zombie. That is going to be House of 1,000 Corpses. Now, based off the title, going into this movie for me, I had no expectations other than I thought it was going to be a schlocky, you know, just dirty, low-hanging fruit horror flick. But I was extremely surprised by the sheer amount of artistic vision that Rob Zombie had for this movie. Basically the story, something you've seen in other films before. This group of young adults are on the road. They kind of get kidnapped by this crazy Texas family. Kind of sounds familiar. And what follows is just a bunch of torture and exploitation and just these batshit insane family members having their way with these people. But surprisingly, there is a lot of really good humor in this movie. Obviously, you have the iconic Captain Spaulding, who's just a great character. One of the main young adults is actually the guy who plays Dwight Schrute from The Office. I mean, he's just a great character, has some great scenes in this movie. And there's also a lot of ironic humor in this movie, which I was totally not expecting, but it definitely landed for me. And beyond the humor, the production and set design in this movie is really, really good. I mean, you have some great gore and creative use of effects. The set design for the house that most of the movie takes place in is really cool. You have, at the end, this crazy big guy who looks like the Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. He comes out the end and you're just like, what the fuck is even going on? It finds a very unique blend of, you know, depraved torture and exploitation with just wacky imagery, characters, and humor, and I don't know why, but it works. It probably shouldn't, but it does, and I absolutely love this movie. Moving on to the number 2 spot, we have another Japanese horror movie, and this one is so unique that I don't even really want to talk about what it's about, but the movie in question is One Cut of the Dead from 2017. The movie basically starts off with this movie crew and cast filming at this old kind of asylum place, filming a zombie movie, but eventually real zombies start showing up, and once they figure out what's going on, chaos ensues. And that is absolutely all I'm going to tell you about this movie, because going any further would just spoil it, and you need to go into this movie completely blind, because there are so many layers of meta to this movie. It just breaks my mind. And some people will say, and I personally thought that, you know, the first hour of this movie, you're kind of wondering, you know, is this really that good? But then you get to the final half hour, one of the best payoffs, probably the best payoff I've ever seen in a movie, and it's just all worth it. It clicks, and you're just thinking, this movie is sheer genius. So that is all I'm going to say about One Cut of the Dead, other than that you need to watch this movie. If you like horror movies, zombie movies, great Japanese or foreign movies, this one will have something for you. It's funny, it's intelligent, it's extremely well made. Watch it now. Alright, we have finally arrived at the coveted number 1 spot on this year's Spooktober 2023 horror movie ranking. And I know some of you guys are probably gonna get mad at me or think this is a cop-out of a number 1 spot, but I have no shame saying that John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween is the best horror movie I watched this year. Now, obviously, Halloween is a horror classic. I mean, it's in the name, it's freaking Halloween. But John Carpenter is just a master of horror, and Halloween is arguably one of his greatest creations ever. Now, this is a rewatch for me. Obviously, I've seen this movie before. I watched it for 4K the first time this October, and I thought it just looked really good. So that definitely elevated the viewing experience, but there are so many other things that make Halloween my favorite watch of this October. Starting off with what I already knew, Halloween just has immaculate fall vibes. I mean, watching this movie just bundled up in autumn time nearing Halloween is just a perfect feeling. And of course, Michael Myers, the antagonist of this movie, is in my opinion one of, if not the greatest horror antagonists of all time. He is so menacing, and just when he's cloaked in shadow in some of these scenes, I mean, he is at his creepiest in this movie. And just the way that this movie is able to build suspense throughout the majority of the movie, and then finally lets Michael Myers just go crazy near the end. I love this build up so much. But the one thing that really pushed Halloween to the top of this list for me was actually a newfound appreciation for Jamie Lee Curtis's performance in this movie. On my first viewing, I wasn't a huge fan of her performance for some reason. It was fine, but didn't really click with me. But this time around, I noticed so many different nuances and subtleties in her performance. I thought it was extremely believable, and I'm finally seeing the light. When everybody's been saying that this performance is amazing, I finally agree. I mean, I don't honestly have that many complaints about this movie at all. I mean, maybe that Dr. Loomis is a bit goofy, but it kind of adds charm to the movie, and compared to what they do to his character in future movies, we won't even talk about that. But yeah, John Carpenter's Halloween is a classic through and through. I really enjoyed this viewing of it, and it is definitely deserving of the #1 spot on this year's ranking. Anyways, guys, that is going to do it for this year's Spooktober horror movie ranking. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little bit of a different video. If you guys want to see me do this video again next year and in years to come, definitely let me know, because I had a lot of fun recording this video, you know, when I wasn't experiencing extremely frustrating technical difficulties. And of course, I want you guys to go down to the comments below, tell me what you think of my rankings. Let me know your favorite horror movies that you watched this October or of all time, because I love horror. I want to talk about horror movies. So if you want to share your comments down below, that would be very much appreciated. But anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. This has been ThePromG. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. And as always, hope to catch you in the next one.